Springfield's Talk 104.1. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Wednesday, my name is Nick Reed. We will be at Scramblers on Friday. We keep getting questions, understandably so. It's a holiday, oftentimes holidays. If it's fallen on a Friday, then we may not be out there, like Black Friday, which isn't really a holiday, but that is a day traditionally we're not out there. We will be out there, however, on Friday. Now, I will mention, because some also have asked, what about happy hour? Happy hour will be the following week. In fact, Retro Metro, I think so staff can, just kind of have a good time and vacation with family and so forth. They are actually going to be closed up Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, maybe even Thursday. They have it posted, so if you are thinking about going there for lunch or dinner one of those days, you may want to just check that schedule, and you can see the latest information there. But the happy hour that normally would be this upcoming Friday instead will be next Friday, the 11th, I believe it is. So just a couple of notes for you as to what exactly we have going on here. We're streaming live, KSGF.com. Of course, the big news yesterday, the big, beautiful bill making out of the Senate. And a number of changes made. And, again, well, listen. To me, thus far, this is pretty standard. It isn't anything exceptional, I should say. And, people can take that for what it is. There are a few things in there that I think a lot of Americans, particularly pro-USA, patriotic Americans, will be pleased about. We hear a lot about the border security aspect of things. And, that's great, fantastic, need that. I think that it is somewhat telling that really seems to be one of the only real bragging points right now. When initially, I think what a lot of Americans or a lot of Trump supporters had really hoped for was, all right, this is the one opportunity we have to really do bold things, to really fix this out of control, negligent spending, immoral spending. A lot of it, I find it to be immoral because of what it does potentially, and just putting people into debt that aren't even alive today. There's just something morally, for me, about putting people into debt that aren't even alive. And for a country that has long been the country that is the greatest one in the entire world, to be born into massive amounts of stifling debt just because you're an American, I think it's immoral. Now, some claim it's immoral to not do that we must create essentially indentured servants where just by virtue of being in this country, you're born owing, hundreds of thousands of dollars back payment to the federal government so that they can use it to help people. That is your moral responsibility. I happen to disagree. It's just, pajamas, I suppose. There are a number of things that over the past 24, 48 hours, or there were a number of things done in the Senate, the big, beautiful bill that I think are absolutely atrocious. And are, again, the reasons that at times I think, what difference does it make, Republican or Democrat? Because really, when it comes to the spending issue, this real massive spending problems, it's like if you're in an airplane and you are just, you're headed straight into a mountain. And in one circumstance, you are 20 seconds away from crashing into the mountain, and then the other circumstance, you're 26 seconds away from crashing into the mountain. I mean, is it really a massive victory to be 26 seconds as opposed to 20 seconds? I don't think so. We've gotten to the point in this country where when it comes to immorally spending future generations' dollars on things that, by the way, don't even make things better. It would be one thing if it was like, hey, this money is making sure that everyone has the best medical care in the world, and look how we've reversed things. The number of doctors and the wait times and the cost, everything has come down over the past 10, 20 years. It's just wonderful now. You could say, well, at least we're getting results. Or when it comes to education, hey, we're number one in the entire world. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were towards the middle, but we've risen up to the top 5. That's not what's going on here. It's getting worse. The outcomes are getting worse. And so on top of the immorality of creating indentured servants of future generations by owing money that we can never get out from underneath, it's being spent to make things worse for us. I just think that is unacceptable and inexcusable. But the Republican Party is run by people who think otherwise and operate otherwise. And so, if you dismiss the spending part of it, if you're like, you know what, I don't care about that, it's irrelevant to me. And you look at what Republicans have passed in terms of spending in the past, this is it's a pretty standard Republican victory. For a lot of people, and this includes me, the disappointing aspect of it was we felt that this was the one shot to really do something meaningful instead of more of the same. And this is more of the same. Now, I understand Trump's perspective on this. He recognizes what he's dealing with, and he recognizes, and Trump is a business guy, and when you see, okay, I've got what I can get, you want to close it up and move forward so you can move on to other things. You don't sit around and dwell on something that is not going to, change the landscape any. And Trump has, in my assessment, evaluated the landscape. He knows what he's in. This is, in his assessment, the best that he's going to be able to get. And he, of course, is going to put a huge victory face on it, which I get. I understand. Now, of course, we still have some unknowns. The House has to look at it, and, how much of a back and forth is there going to be? I suspect that ultimately, as most people do, this isn't any brilliant analysis, that Republicans, even, most of the Freedom Caucus members are going to have pretty much the same perspective as Trump, is this is the best that we're going to get, and that there's truth to that. I don't blame a Freedom Caucus member if they vote for this based off of, well, this is the best that we can get. And let me explain that, because a lot of folks, this is what we tire of from the Republican Party, right? That's the motto. This is the best we can get. What an inspiring message. But if you're a Freedom Caucus member, if you're one of only a handful of Republicans that ultimately are not in charge, and you recognize that reality, and there really is nothing you can do about it, I get that. I believe the ultimate problem lies within the Republican leadership, the Mike Johnsons, who accept that, who fail to lead the Republican Party in a manner that is consistent with what the Republican Party claims its values are. A Republican Party that is led by people, instead of siding with people like Congressman Burleson and other Freedom Caucus members who are actually doing what it is that they said they're going to do, they side with those who do the opposite of what they get elected to do. That's where the problem is. And that's who I don't blame Trump for this, in my assessment, anemic in terms of meaningful change, big, beautiful bill. I don't blame Freedom Caucus members or other conservative Republicans who have fought tooth and nail and been demonized to get just absolutely anything that is a semblance of what it is that the voters have been promised. I blame the leadership of the Republican Party, whose motto has become, well, it's the best we can do, and not actually leading, but instead surrendering to the big government politicians that occupy the Republican Party. Hey, that's my assessment. Pyramid Roofing Company, talk at text line 447-KSGF. I will, coming up, tell you just a couple of things in it that I think are a sign, again, of betrayal by the leadership of the Republican Party, ultimately. And then we've got a lot of other stuff to cover this morning. Here is the latest news update.
And the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see sunny skies with a high near 86. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Thursday, sunny with a high near 89. And looking ahead to Independence Day, sunny skies with a high near 90.
I want to read two text messages on the Pyramid Roofing Company talk and text line, and they are different perspectives, both of which I completely understand. And I don't want to belabor this point too much, but I do think that it does put a lot of Republican voters in this very frustrated, almost a position of deflated, what difference does it make when it comes to this irresponsible and immoral spending problem that we have in this country. And one of the text messages said, I blame the Republican Party for allowing these people to continue to run as Republicans. And this is what I believe to be part of the problem. When it comes to a lot of these elections, people like Mike Johnson campaign for these Republicans that vote like Democrats, essentially, when it comes to these issues of spending. And that is a leadership problem, though. That's the captain of the ship. You've got, this hierarchy, and that is where I also lay the blame. Now, another saying Representative Burleson is saying the exact thing, or what it was that I was saying. That, well, this is the best that we can do. That does not show leadership. He should have never voted for it. It is not an easy position to be in. And I'm just, again, giving you my perspective on this. Sometimes I don't believe there is an absolute right and absolute wrong. Sometimes it's just a matter of personal preference. In a context like this, Congressman Burleson, he's not, in a context like this, of getting the big, beautiful bill to, let's say, be actually fiscally responsible. And I'm trying to think how to word this without it being taken wrong. He is not a leader. And I mean, in the context of a leadership position that can corral or should be or could be responsible for twisting arms if necessary to get Republicans to be fiscally responsible. Now, I would argue that in the context of his position as an individual member of Congress and a member of the Freedom Caucus, that there are things in this, or the House version of the big beautiful bill, that would not be in there, that are good things, that are let me put it this way. I believe that the spending would be even worse if it were not for the handful, the gang of few that include Congressman Burleson. And so in that context, if you want to call it leadership or whatever, that there is a meaningful difference that is made there. But ultimately, it is the official leadership of the party that is, it's Mike Johnson who is in a position that can go to moderate Republicans and say, we are not going to give money to your reelection campaign. The central committees, the divisions of the Republican National Committee or Congress, whatever these different institutions or entities that Mike Johnson or Republican leadership have authority over, that determine, all right, who gets money for their reelection campaign. Congressman Burleson does not have, or any of the other Freedom Caucus. I keep using him as an example because, he's 7th Congressional District. But any of these others, like the Chip Roys or some of these folks, they don't have the ability to cause harm to Republicans that betray the constituency. They don't have the ability to do that. Someone like Mike Johnson does. But he does not do that. Instead, he will continue to make sure they get money and continue to make sure they get reelected. And so that, again, is where I see the problem. Ultimately, I look at it and I think, okay, what would need to occur for this reality to be different? And that is to either have a Republican Party that is populated with the actual conservative members, which we don't have that. So then you can do one of two things. You can either long game it and try and get us there, but you have to do that by supporting actual conservative candidates, and that, again, is what the leadership does not do. Or you could, again, threaten those individuals, and instead of demonizing Freedom Caucus members as hijacking everything, that the power of that should be used against the spenders, the big government Republicans. And so when I look at who is mostly responsible ultimately for this continued problem, that's where it lies. And individually, and I've not been shy about this, when you have people like on the Senate side, Senator Josh Hawley running around pushing the exact same program, spending legislation and so forth as left-wing Democrats, that is a massive problem. And when it comes down to it, the fact that come primary season, Missouri voters will easily reelect him in the Republican primary, that comes down to the voters. And then it is our fault when it really trickles down to it. So a couple of the last-minute changes. One had to do with these Green New Deal stuff. This is part of the great frustration when you have some of the most devastating pieces of legislation passed by Democrats that Republicans successfully campaign on or against, then they save it when the time comes. Obamacare was a perfect example of that. And a lot of the fiscal irresponsibility and damage done to programs by way of Obamacare that a number of Republicans have tried to undo those damages. You have Republicans that want to save those aspects of Obamacare. Green New Deal, same thing. These massive corporate welfare giveaways. And for industries that so often have demonstrated they can't survive without it. It's not like a jump start. Like, well, we just need a little bit of a jump start. How many times under Obama have we talked about, or Biden, these different tax incentives or these giveaways to some green company, and then we find out, after everyone got their money, it closes up shop. So it's just all about essentially just handing out taxpayer dollars to people that the elected officials want to vote for them in turn. And now Republicans are in the game, at least some of them. So restrictions on eligibility, this is over in the Senate, restrictions on eligibility for expiring green energy tax credits, which were created by the Inflation Reduction Act, Green New Deal, whatever you want to call it, were eased slightly thanks to Republican senators whose states host projects that will benefit from the subsidies and buying votes. Same thing Obama did, same thing Biden did. The group, led by Joni Ernst of Iowa, wanted to keep subsidies flowing to projects that would begin construction by the end of 2027 rather than only those put in service by that date, as the original Senate text had it. So instead of getting rid of it, at one point it was, okay, we'll keep them up until like any of these corporate welfare companies that get built and started by 2027, but after that, the taxpayer, the trough gets cut off. Well, they changed it to say that anyone who just even begins construction by 2027 gets at the trough. So that means all you have to do is by that date, put a shovel in the ground, turn over one bit of dirt, and the money flow is yours. It's Republicans that have thrown a massive lifeline to the Green New Deal. A stabilization fund to dole out money to rural hospitals doubled in value from $25 billion over 5 years to $50 billion. And as noted in the Federalist, the fund far exceeds what rural hospitals can be expected to lose anyway, as they only receive around $12 billion in total. So what's number one, of course, this is just feeding the problem that we have made our healthcare system, because of government intervention, so unsustainable. We have done what happens in every country where they try this, and that is there's a hole. And all of a sudden, hospitals that were self-sustaining and providing the best and most efficient quality service possible suddenly are becoming less efficient and running out of money, so the taxpayers have to throw money at them. But this gives them over twice what it is that they're expected to need in the first place. So again, just throwing your money around buying votes. Perhaps one of the most atrocious aspects of this has to do with Planned Parenthood. Yes, give you a hint. We've got to take a quick break here. Refunding Planned Parenthood. All right, we got a traffic update, then 90 seconds from there, weather, and then refunding Planned Parenthood. This is the Senate version versus the House version of the big, beautiful bill. That next. I'm Nick Reed.
Field Stock 1041, the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see sunny skies with a high near 86. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Thursday, sunny with a high near 89. And looking ahead to Independence Day, sunny skies with a high near 90.
Emily Johnson, Nate had the following to say. We had such a wonderful selling experience because of our realtor. She's very kind, explained everything clearly, walked us through issues, very thorough. She kept us up to date every step of the way, made what could be a stressful time easy because of the support she offers. We very highly recommend Emily Johnson to anyone looking for a wonderful realtor. Chad said, I can't say enough good things about Emily Johnson. We were in the market for such a long time. She was patient, helpful, went beyond what other realtors we've worked with in the past have gone to make sure that we got into a great home. She helped find the right contractors, get our place updated, made the paperwork a breeze. She negotiated hard when we needed it, and she got us a great price on a home our whole family loves. Thank you so much, Emily. That is just a couple of reviews, and I've used her. Sarah's used her. I know a number of you have as well, and I find everyone who uses her also recommends her for all your home buying and selling needs. Totally awesome, Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. All right, now let me explain a little trick here, how this works. And the Federalist has a piece, headline, VP Vance's tie-breaking vote helps Senate pass bill defunding Planned Parenthood for 1 year. Well, that sounds good, doesn't it? The House version for the 10-year spending cycle banned it altogether. So now I guess this is glass half full, glass half empty. While some will see this, and I'm sure the Republicans who voted for it in the Senate, is that, hey, we defunded Planned Parenthood for a year. The way I see it is they refunded it for 9 out of 10, because that's the reality of what happened. Now, again, these may be some of the real sticking points in when the House reevaluates this. Of all the things, and I know there's this desire, and I understand it, this desire for the House to just rubber stamp it, get it to Trump, big, beautiful bill, done, awesome, victory. But if, as Republican voters, we can't expect to elect our party, which I know I'm not officially a Republican, but that's obviously the way that I tend to vote. If we can't even get our party to stop forcing us to pay for abortions, then what the hell? I mean, really? It's almost as if there is an expectation hierarchy, and like what's the one absolute no-brainer? Well, I don't know, that we don't have to pay for abortions, that Republicans don't vote to use our tax dollars to pay for abortions. That'd probably be the most obvious one. We can't get that done. Now, the trick of it, of course, again, is when you have the House version that says during the 10-year spending cycle, no dollars go to Planned Parenthood, and then the Republican version, or over on the Senate version, says, well, 1 year, the other 9, okay, there can be funding. That allows, again, the Senate to be like, no, we voted to defund Planned Parenthood. Oh, you voted to fund it for 9 out of 10 years. That's 90% of the time. Do we think that we don't need to do the can you imagine if, can you imagine that? I can't think of a more atrocious example of the Republican Party's dishonesty than when it comes to this funding, and then setting the stage to essentially lie to the voters so that they can run around saying we defunded Planned Parenthood, when in fact their version funds it for 9 out of 10 years, 90% of the time. On a grading scale, that's an A. So if the pro-abortion lobby, now of course they'll pitch a fit about it, but in reality, 90%, that's an A. And then one other just little bonus. This stuff, it does really give you an opportunity if you pay attention to see who these people really are. One of the hallmarks of Republican ideology and platforms is that raising taxes does not do good. Particularly the trying to pit people against the evil rich who already pay the lion's share of taxes. This is the go-to, almost lazy, cliched approach of the Democrats, is we're going to raise taxes on the rich. Well, guess who put forth an amendment to raise taxes on the rich? Susan Collins. All in the name of throwing money at rural hospitals. That government intervention has resulted in economic issues. And so, of course, their answer is more the same, but that aside. So her answer, just like Democrats, well, we got to raise taxes on the rich. So she put forth an amendment, which, by the way, failed, that would raise the top tax individual income tax rate from, I think it's 37 now, to 39.6. Josh Hawley voted for it. Now, let me double check this. Yes, the other Missouri U.S. Senator Schmidt voted against it. So here, yet again, we have a Republican U.S. Senator that has pushed for price controls on private industries, has pushed back against trying to keep programs like, Medicare or Medicaid solvent by having work requirements, pushes to double the minimum wage in red states, and now has voted for an amendment to raise taxes on the rich. Which party does this guy belong to? Fortunately, again, that amendment failed. Springfield's Talk 1041, Pyramid Roofing Company, talk and text line 447 KSGF. I'm Nick Reed. Someone had texted in the Pyramid Roofing Company talk and text line saying, I'm confused. Does this, cut Medicaid? Does it not? What's the story here? And everyone can be forgiven for being confused because these people, they all lie about it. Well, not all of them. Some tell the truth. But what's the truth? And, of course, when they're talking about cuts, what does that mean? Oftentimes when they talk about cuts, it is generally those who don't want work requirements in place. And what happens is whenever the CBO looks at this stuff and they're like, okay, if there are work requirements in place, it doesn't say if you can work, you don't qualify. It just says if you can work and you want to continue to qualify, you have to have a job. And then the CBO will estimate, or there'll be, these estimations. I think it's a CBO that does this particular estimation, as well as perhaps some other organizations that say, okay, well, we estimate that this number of people will decide not to get a job, and so they will then voluntarily be giving up their access to this government-funded program because they choose not to get a job. And so that means that those people will not have. So then what happens is people who want all of this out-of-control spending will say, oh, look at all the people that are going to be kicked off the program. And they want you to believe that it's some mother of a 18-month-old baby that is on a feeding tube that is going to die because of it. So even when it comes to the term cutting, and let's not forget, particularly with Democrats, if they say we should increase spending by 10% and you say we should increase spending by 9.5%, they say you're slashing the program. So, the terminology itself gets manipulated in order to mislead people very, very often. Now, that being said, there is a town hall story, and it is surrounding Missouri Senator Schmidt, noting that he is setting the record straight after the Senate, they write, passed the tax relief legislation Tuesday. Schmidt took to social media to share the facts, assuring Americans that the bill delivers real benefits and is a win for the country. In a post on X, he dismissed rumors suggesting that the Medicaid ban for illegal immigrants had been removed from the bill. He referenced page 602, section 77109, confirming that the amendment remains part of the legislation. He emphasized that the big, beautiful bill will remove Medicaid coverage for 1.4 million illegal immigrants. He explained that during Monday's Vote-A-Rama, an amendment to block Medicaid for illegal immigrants was rejected. A video of that vote quickly spread online, which is true, leading many to believe the provision had been entirely removed from the bill. However, he clarified that this was just one of several messaging amendments meant to pressure Democrats into publicly opposing specific measures, specifically a ban on Medicaid funding for illegal immigrants convicted of serious crimes. Quote, it was meant to show the public how radical they are, he wrote on X. The ban itself was already in the bill. It was never taken out, and it was just a ban on some Medicaid for illegal immigrants who commit heinous crimes. It applies to all Medicaid for all illegal immigrants and most non-citizens generally. So the way it sounds, according to Schmidt here, is, listen, it was already a ban, but we wanted to vote on an amendment that specifically cited like violent criminals because we knew that Democrats would vote against it, even though it was meaningless, and then we could show how bad they are. That appears to be the case. So a little bit of marketing there that potentially backfired on the Republicans, because if that is the case, and the whole point was to put Democrats on the record as being radical when it comes to pro-illegal immigration, but the result is this appearance that Republicans voted to save or that the amendment failed, and that meant that they were going to continue to get the funding when they weren't, sort of backfired a little bit. But in the end, I suppose if, and I imagine it will, there is one beautiful big bill that is signed by Trump. It will be there's going to be some very specific tent poles that they're going to use as bragging points. I'm sure border security is obviously going to be one in terms of spending. And then anything that has to do with, Medicaid regarding illegals or people who are able to work but choose not to. If there is an impact there, I suspect these are the things that they're really going to lead with to make sure people understand. So we'll see. There we have it. I wanted to play some audio yesterday on CNN. And I wanted to play this because every so often we continue to hear this narrative that things are they're going so horribly, that Republican voters are sure that they're just regretting their vote. They're regretting their vote. Talked about this yesterday or the day before. Like, who are you talking to? And what is it that Trump has done that somebody who voted for Trump would say, oh, actually, I'm sorry that he's doing that? Well, over on CNN, Harry Eaton, who is, or Enton, rather, E-N-T-E-N, he's their guy, hey, here are the polls, and this is what it means, who breaks it down, and they looked at just that. So what about Republican voters? How do they feel about Donald Trump 5 months in?
Yeah, okay, so we're going to look at the strongly approved numbers. So this isn't just Republicans who like Donald Trump. This is Republicans who love Donald Trump, and he's up like a rocket. Look at this. In July 2017, the strongly approved was 53%. That's pretty good. But look at where he is now. 63% of Republicans strongly approve of the job that Donald Trump is doing about 5 months into his presidency. Republicans love Donald Trump the way that Americans love Disney World. The bottom line is 63%. That is a huge, huge base. And of course, it's just part of a Republican base in which about 90% of them overall approve of him, including the somewhat approves as well.
I mean, any politician would like this number here, especially to see it go up. How about compared to other presidents who were Republicans?
Yeah, it's history making. It's history making. What are we talking about here? So why don't we look back? We have all the presidents, Republican presidents, going back over the last 35, 36, 37 years. What are we talking about? GOP, who strongly approved 5 months in. Look at this. George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, 46%. Bush 43, 59. You see Trump, the first term, 53. But look at this. 63%. He beats all the other Republicans on the board here. And I was looking even back since Reagan. And get this, Donald Trump beats Ronald Reagan when it comes to the strongly approved 5 months. And of course, Reagan was coming off that high after that assassination attempt. So the bottom line is Donald Trump is making history with the Republican base. He is more beloved by this Republican base than any Republican base loved any GOP president 5 months in. It is history making.
It is a striking number.
Yeah, and historic is an accurate term. So if I know part of the propaganda from the left, some of it's self-soothing. Some of it is to try to cast doubt amongst Trump supporters that, just things are so bad. They're so awful. Again, they never point to any evidence. They never say, here's what's bad. They never say, inflation has skyrocketed. Well, because they can't say that. Gas prices have skyrocketed. Well, they can't say that. The stock market has completely crashed. Well, it's at record highs. All of these, just everything is firing on all cylinders. But they just have to sort of paint this picture just even his own supporters, they're you should really be concerned if you're a Trump supporter because some of your own are upset and unhappy and they're regretting that vote. No. Nope. Sorry. You're going to have to find something else to self-soothe. Springfield's Talk 104.1. I'm Nick Reed. Pennegar Honda, yes, indeedy do. Hey, they are still in the mode of looking for pre-owned vehicles. Your vehicle, they are looking for quality used Hondas in particular. Doesn't have to be, but that's what they're real focused on. They're offering top dollar for the vehicle, plus throw in an additional $1,000 towards your trade with the purchase of a new Honda. Now, just to give you an idea, when it comes to the quality pre-owned vehicles available now, they have over 130 to choose from. They have the largest selection of certified pre-owned Hondas in the area with over 100 certified used Hondas on our lot now. Now, I could say they're certified. Maybe sometimes you bought a pre-owned vehicle and they're like, now for, if you want, with only $30 extra a month on your payment, this vehicle can be certified and it gets you this and that. They take care of that for you. That's not anything that cost you. It's not something you go without unless you pay extra. That is something Pennegar Honda takes care of. That involves a 182-point inspection from Honda, a great warranty when buying the certified pre-owned 7-year, 100,000-mile powertrain, 2 free oil changes first year. And again, that is something, that certification that Pennegar Honda does beforehand, so it's nothing you have to worry about. And of course, they have incredible deals on new vehicles as well. And don't forget Fridays, Food Truck Friday at Pennegar Honda. Awesome people, awesome family. South Campbell, just south of Walnut Lawn. The last couple of days, we talked about the final acknowledgement that is coming from the media that the tariffs aren't causing these spike in prices. It's just not happening. They tried to ignore it because the sky was falling. Oh, it was falling. So, yes. It's horrible, horrible. My gosh, it's awful. Trump's like, nah. And he acknowledged, maybe in the beginning, and even he said, listen, with that day or two that stock prices were down, he goes, hey, if you have money, I'd buy. He was right. He was right. He was right. Right. CBS News had published a story yesterday. The Trump tariffs aren't causing U.S. prices to spike. Here's why. So they do a real deep dive into it, and it gives some, I think it's valuable insight, and none of it is necessarily. Let me put it this way: a lot of it is stuff that somebody like Trump knew would cause a lack of spike in prices. This is part of the reason that he assured people, don't worry. Yeah, maybe a little bit, maybe temporary, but ultimately the way that they're making this sound is not going to happen, and he was right. And for a lot of the reasons that this story talks about, and we'll get it posted. But you know what it's going to sound like I'm being snarky. But what they really ought to do, instead of evaluating, or in addition to evaluating why it is that there wasn't a spike in prices due to tariffs, they should, in addition to that, do a real deep dive and an honest evaluation as to why it was that they thought there would be. Why? That's what I'm just as curious about. Why is it that everyone in the media all sang the same song? How was it that Trump was correct and those within Trump's circle that were out there promoting the Liberation Day, August 2nd, in which these tariffs went in across the board, yet every media outlet, every expert that every media outlet had on all said the same thing? How about a headline that evaluates why it was everyone was wrong about what would happen with prices regarding the tariffs? Not only would that be instructive for the reader, the viewer, the listener, but it might actually help, if they were honest and really wanted to produce a better, more accurate product, might help them internally figure out. I would like to know this. If I worked at one of these outlets and we were all wrong, I'd be like, hey, we need to figure out what we missed here. We need to figure out how it is that we can not make these massive mistakes again. I suspect that thought itself probably never even crossed their mind. Springfield's Talk 1041. Hello, welcome to the show. Streaming live, KSGF.com, also the app. We are on YouTube. You can look up 1041 104 Springfield's Talk 1041. Isn't that what it is?
I believe so.
Yeah, something like that.
If you look that up, I'm sure we'll pop up.
Poppity pop pop. Oh, this was. I thought this was really good audio. So Trump yesterday went down to Florida, and the alligator Alcatraz. Do you know how long it took to build that?
Huh.
8 days.
What?
8. Remember, I had mentioned yesterday talking about it. I was like, what sort of infrastructure's there? I haven't even really been paying that much attention to this. 8 days. It was already built. DeSantis had already built this. It's a state facility. Trump's just down there like, this is awesome. And evidently, I don't know if it was DeSantis, but somebody had noted if it weren't for government regulations, it would have been done in about 2.5 days.
Whoa.
I mean, now think about just how different Florida is than a state that's mediocre like Missouri. Now, we look at that, we're like 8 days, and they see it as that's too long. Like, if it weren't for those pesky government regulations, we would have had it done in like, are you at what? 8 days?
That is crazy.
That is absolutely crazy. The other day I was listening to, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, when there's a notation of people leaving blue states. I think it was a conversation about Democrats in this commie that is in all likelihood going to be the next mayor of New York City, and that how they expect another wave of people to flee. And they always list off these states. Sometimes they say Florida, Texas, but sometimes the list will go on. Like, they always go to Florida, Texas, Tennessee. They list off, and this commentator listed off like 8 states. Missouri, of course, not. Missouri is never listed. What does that tell us? I mean, I think that should be a wake-up call that we aren't really doing our best, that Republicans have a supermajority in this state, yet every time you watch commentary, discussion, analysis on television or read an article, an editorial about people fleeing blue states to go to red states, leaving worse states to go to better states, and the states are listed to which people are going, Missouri's never in that list. Now, there are a lot of states that aren't on that list, but wouldn't it be nice to be on that list? You would think that having a supermajority, which you don't even really need. I mean, the supermajority is handy if you want to override a veto. But, that whole lot of Republicans, I mean, I don't know if you heard during the last primary, they're all the most conservative elected officials ever, including the governor. Yet never is Missouri listed as a state that people are flocking to when they flee a state like California. Now, you know, because we've talked about it, that doesn't mean that people don't come here. It seems as if whenever somebody does come to Missouri, move to Missouri from another state, 50% of the time it's from California. But just the recognition of what states are truly, conservative, if you will, Missouri is never listed. When it comes to real life, now you might come up with, well, this, over here, we're in the top 10 of this or that. I'm just talking about real stuff. People move where they, that, and it's just very disappointing, very disappointing. Speaking of the alligator Alcatraz, Town Hall has a story, a cannibal on deportation flight. Nome reveals shocking case as ICE agents target worst of the worst. Department of Homeland Security Kristi Noem shared alarming revelations about what ICE has discovered during the Trump administration's large-scale deportation efforts involving illegal immigrants. It is well known some illegal immigrants apprehended by authorities have violent criminal histories, including involvement in sex trafficking, crimes against minors. However, one recent case stands out. According to Noem, a detainee on a deportation flight reportedly attempted to eat parts of his own body, an incident she described as one of the most disturbing yet. Quote, "We're going after murderers and rapists, traffickers and drug dealers, getting them off the streets, getting them out of this country, because Joe Biden let the worst of the worst come in here." The other day, I was talking to some marshals that have been partnering with ICE. They said that they had detained a cannibal and put him on a plane to take him home, and while they had him in his seat, he started eating himself. That seems like a pretty extreme example. I'm just waiting. I'm surprised at this point Democrats have not jumped all over that as, proof of human rights violations, or, they need more snacks available, maybe. You know how hungry you have to be? There's first Republicans try to starve people to death waiting in line to vote in Georgia, and now they're trying to starve them to death, these illegal aliens, or have to turn to eating themselves. Here's Trump down there. This is a bit of audio, and I may have to, I don't know, you have to listen at the very end as Trump trails off, in which he is there at the facility, and this is down there at Alligator Alcatraz in Florida.
Oh, hey, Biden wanted me in here. He wanted me. It didn't work out that way, but he wanted me in here. That son of a.
Did you hear what he said at the end? That son of a... He just like... that son of a... Oh, that was... you could easily not hear it because he just sort of trails it off. It's like not an afterthought, but just... I don't know. I thought it was pretty good. All right, coming up, I want to air some audio from a sit-down interview RFK Jr. did with Tucker Carlson. And he talks a lot about CDC and vaccines, and as is most of the sit-down interviews with Tucker Carlson, quite long. But I grabbed some excerpts because I think there's some very informative information in there that, as you know, I mean, this is a significant guy that I think most reasonable people, while they recognize, listen, he's a human being. But he's not in there for political purposes. I mean, he's not some perfect... He certainly isn't like Fauci, who demands, I am science. You must listen to everything I say. If not, you're a denier of science. RFK Jr. is like, listen, I'm just about getting the information out there. What has happened, what's going to happen, and getting the information out there so that the people are full... Transparency. And as you can imagine, a lot of people are very opposed to that. Which anyone who is opposed to transparency, particularly when it comes to government involvement in your health, that's a massive red flag. We've got that coming up right now, the latest news update.
And the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see sunny skies with a high near 86. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Thursday, sunny with a high near 89. And looking ahead to Independence Day, sunny skies with a high near 90.
You know, it's very common when it comes to home improvements, kitchens, bathrooms, just indoor remodeling, and that's valuable, that's nice. But you think about, especially when it comes just to changing the aesthetics, let's say, of the kitchen, and that's a pretty pricey investment, and it'll be well worth it, that's for sure. But for oftentimes the same amount of investment, you can expand your living space into the outdoors. This is where Hunter Hardscapes and Outdoor comes into play. So instead of simply doing a facelift on a part of the home that already exists, you can actually expand and create new home in the outdoors. Or it could be partially indoors with a covering if you want. You can have an outdoor kitchen. You can accommodate gatherings of as many people as you want, or have it be kind of a nice intimate setting, closed in with different trees and shrubs, and this all is an area of expertise from the premier provider of landscaping services and hardscaping services, and that's Hunter Hardscapes and Outdoor. You can see the incredible work they do, real life stuff locally with it's got some pictures of the projects, and then a slider you can click and see before and after, and also a pricing calculator. It's not an exact quote, obviously, but give you an idea of what it is that you are looking at when it comes to expanding the footprint of your home into your very own yard. And that is, again, Hunter Hardscapes and Outdoor. You can find them at hunterhardscapes.com, also KSGF.com, Nick's endorsements. All right, let's get into some of this RFK Jr. stuff. He sat down with Tucker Carlson and talked a lot about vaccines, the CDC, and otherwise. And let's see, where do I want to start? There's a number of bits of audio, and as always, it was a pretty long, extended sit-down interview. But I wanted to, let's see. Let's start with his discussion on the media's constant parroting of what is disinformation, and that is the link between vaccines and autism has been debunked. You hear it all the time. Well, it's just been debunked. So that's it. No questions asked. Believe the authorities. Believe the experts. If you dare question, particularly those who make millions and millions of dollars off this stuff, if you question them, then you are a science denier. Now, before I get into this, I want to just give you where I'm coming from on it, so you can take all this with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert on this, but there are a couple of things I know. One, our government lies to us, and they lie to us quite a bit. That's just truth. Two, this was in clear overdrive when it came to COVID. Anyone who denies that is in total and complete denial. I mean, we know this for a fact. We know it because of Freedom of Information Act request and some of these different government institutions being forced to turn over emails that at times they were trying to hide. So this isn't a question of if we were lied to. We were lied to. We also know that a number of the people making decisions regarding vaccines, and this goes into the COVID era, financially benefited from encouraging people to take these vaccines. These are all truths. I also know that a vaccine, like any other sort of medicine, is something foreign that gets put in your body for the purpose of altering what is going on in your body, by definition, right? Even something as simple as ibuprofen. It is a foreign thing that you ingest in order to alter what is going on in your body. And I also know that you can't buy a single thing over the counter without hundreds of words of fine print telling you about all the possible side effects. We can all agree on this, right? So understanding that, the idea that it is somehow insane or kooky or conspiracy theorist to think that it's possible injecting vaccines into babies or young children can never in any way, shape, or form have any sort of unintended side effects. I mean, just think about that premise itself. Now, that doesn't mean by default it does. That's another discussion. But do you know how ridiculous when you really think about it? When the whole purpose, again, is altering what your body does, how it functions. It's inserting something foreign into your body. But it's only going to do with all of the different people, all of our bodies. While there are so many similarities, there are also a lot of differences. Some people can eat peanuts by the handful, while other people die if they lick one. So the idea that injecting vaccines into, particularly during such an early period of time, babies, you have to be out of your mind to think that could go wrong. No, you have to be out of your mind to think that it's impossible for it to go wrong. So all of these things combined demonstrate to me that a smart person recognizes that it certainly is possible that vaccines have unintended consequences, and perhaps those unintended consequences could be physical detrimental effects that we look at and recognize and classify as autism. To me, that seems like that's certainly a possibility. And so that's my approach with this stuff. I'm going to take a break. We're going to get into some of the audio of RFK Jr. as he sat down with Tucker Carlson talking about a number of different aspects of all of this, including the CDC and specific things that they have done in order to mislead people about potential or vaccine injury, as it's classified, and that would be the unintended side effects of vaccines. RFK Jr. sitting down with Tucker Carlson, having in-depth discussion about vaccines, autism, CDC. There's a lot of this are spokes in a wheel of disinformation and corruption. Not disinformation coming from RFK Jr., but highlighting what disinformation has been out there regarding this. And oftentimes the disinformation is just claiming, well, there is no information on this or that or so forth. One of the areas that we hear so often regarding vaccines and autism is that it's been totally debunked, that it has been proven that there is no link whatsoever between vaccines and autism. And this is what RFK Jr. had to say about that assertion.
You'll see this on every mainstream, Anderson Cooper, Jake Tapper, all of these guys, say again and again that the link between autism and vaccines has been debunked, right? It's been studied. But those studies that I was talking about earlier, the epidemiological studies, they only looked at one vaccine, the MMR, and one ingredient, thimerosal. None of the vaccines that are administered to children during the first 6 months of life have ever been studied for autism. In fact, the Institute of Medicine said that they looked at this issue, has it been debunked? And they said, no, these studies have never been done on the vaccines that are the most likely culprit, which is, DTaP, Hep B, the pneumococcal, the vaccines group in the first 6 months, none of them. They said the only one that has ever been studied is DTaP, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. And they said that the one study that was done showed that, there was a link with autism, but we're not going to count that study because it was based on the VAERS system, which is CDC's only surveillance system. And they said that system is too unreliable. So what they were saying, the Institute of Medicine, which is part of the National Academy of Sciences, said that the only system that CDC has to study vaccine injury is so bad that any study done on it, we're not going to count.
All right. So, in a nutshell, this is a common tactic, by the way. If you want a narrative to exist, you do a very specific, targeted study that may cover 0.1% of the particular issue, and then you can try and use that to represent it in its entirety. We hear it all the time when it comes to pre-K. You hear all the time, well, studies have shown that kids don't go to pre-K. By the time they get into kindergarten, all of a sudden they're so far behind in this and that. Well, they're citing one study that was done, I think it was for an inner city school in Chicago, that the authors of the study specifically said this is a very narrow study that cannot be used to evaluate the average young person and whether or not going into pre-K puts them ahead or behind. But it gets misused for that purpose anyhow, and that's the goal. It isn't to get to the truth, it is to create a narrative. And so what he speaks of there is that these different institutions fully acknowledge, all these studies have not been done. There was one study at one time that was done, and it did show a link, but the CDC then said, well, we're not going to count that because we can't trust our own methods, the VAERS system, VAERS. Now, this is a system that we talked about during COVID, because when people began expressing concerns about taking a vaccine that did not have there wasn't enough time. Like, should I take it? Or how do we know if people are being harmed? And the CDC publicly said, don't worry, we have this VAERS system. And this is a system where people will report this stuff. This is how we will monitor in order to keep the public safe, whether or not there are any sort of vaccine injuries. I remember this specifically because we talked about it on this program, and we talked about the fact that months later, or maybe it was a year later, whenever it began to demonstrate that VAERS system that the CDC uses, that, oh my gosh, there are a lot of people that are having, according to the VAERS system, these vaccine injuries. All of a sudden, the CDC said, well, that's not really a reliable system because it's self-reporting and you can't rely on it. Well, that's the system that they rely on. And the next bit of audio I'm going to play after we're going to get a traffic update here is RFK Jr.'s, and he makes the point, and he uses evidence to do it. that the CDC is deliberately utilizing a system that when it's convenient for them, they can dismiss as being inaccurate. Which I think the way he lays it out, it makes sense to me. And why would you continue to have a system that you say doesn't actually work and can't be relied upon unless you wanted it for that reason? Traffic update, more with RFK Jr. coming up. I'm Nick Reed.
Springfield's Talk 1041, the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see sunny skies with a high near 86. Tonight mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Thursday, sunny skies with a high near 89. And looking ahead to Independence Day, we'll see sunny skies with a high near 90. And wanted to read a review for the fine folks over at Foreman Mechanical Heating and Air. Brandy wrote, "Our air quit working and the tech showed up within an hour and got it up and running within an hour. Definitely recommend Foreman Mechanical for all of your AC needs." And that's what you get with Foreman Mechanical. Their techs are always punctual and they always get the job done quickly and efficiently. I know this to be true. I've used Russell and his crew ever since we've moved out to our home, and they've always done just a fantastic job. Last year, my AC went out on probably the hottest day of the year, and the Foreman team, they were out the very next day. They had me up and running within an hour, and I'm just very grateful for their services. So whether you need an AC tune-up, a service repair, or maybe it's time to upgrade your unit, schedule that appointment today. Now you can find all of the contact information for Foreman Mechanical Heating and Air under the Sarah's Endorsements tab at ksgf.com.
As I play this RFK Jr. audio with his interview with Tucker Carlson regarding vaccines, autism, CDC, and so forth, I think it's important to note that the expectation here is not that you believe what he says. Or accept it as gospel, I should say. That's not what this is about. For me, his motivation, thus far he has demonstrated, is simply about getting to the truth. It doesn't mean he's going to be right. But I believe, this is a judgment call, that his motivation is to get to the absolute truth as to whether or not there's a link, if there is, who's covering up, who's doing this, who's doing that. This is in contrast to the vast majority of people that are put on networks that talk about these issues, who are oftentimes driven by politics. They are driven by money. You know, even these networks, they get a lot of advertising dollars from these companies that benefit financially from so many of these different vaccines. And that doesn't mean that they're inherently dishonest or that they will be dishonest. But I think many of them have demonstrated they are. So RFK Jr. to me is worth listening to because he's providing information from a perspective of someone who has, to me, demonstrated that he just has one goal in mind, and that's the truth. And so you may hear things that you don't agree with, and that's fine, because the point isn't, oh, here's what he says, so you should believe what he says is true. But it is to receive information from somebody that I believe is honest and driven by nothing other than the truth. So he spoke about the fact that, and we'll have all this up in podcast, of course, if you miss any of it. The earlier segment was him talking to Tucker Carlson about the fact that it is a myth whenever, it was just disinformation to claim that it's been debunked that there is a link between autism and vaccine. Now, that's not the same as saying that it's been proven, but it's not true to say it's been debunked. And what he talked about is, in fact, the CDC has acknowledged that there was a study and that the study did show a link, but they said we can't rely on it because we use numbers from our own VAERS system, VAERS, it's the monitoring system, and our system isn't reliable, which of course then, why do you have the system and why would you do the study in the first place? But that aside, he goes on a bit in more detail about how it is that the CDC, in his assessment, and I agree, are purposefully using an unreliable system when it comes to monitoring vaccine injuries.
David Kessler, who was a very famous Surgeon General, who you remember, and many, many, many other people have said the VAERS system does not work, and you need a new system. So in 2010, CDC designed a new system, and it was a machine counting system. The problem with VAERS, with the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, is that it's voluntary.
Yes.
And so the doctor has to, if he sees a vaccine injury, he's required to report it to VAERS. But there's no penalty if he doesn't. It takes him a half an hour to fill out the paperwork. So there's a big incentive for him not to do it. There's another incentive, though. He doesn't know if something is a vaccine injury. If you get a vaccine and then 4 years later, you come in with a food allergy, how do you know? Will any doctor in the world say that's a vaccine injury? Or seizure disorders? And the other thing is, so they don't know, what to look for. They've never been taught that at medical school. There's no course on vaccine injury in medical school, in any medical school in this country. And then the other thing is he has a big emotional incentive because he told that mom to give that child that vaccine.
Oh, yeah.
And if the child has a seizure 3 weeks later and she comes back and she says, I think it might be the vaccine, a lot of doctors will say, no, that's normal for that age. And they're not going to call it into VAERS. So CDC designed a machine counting system that would do essentially a cluster analysis. They would look at the vaccine and then they would look at clusters of injuries that were unique or anomalous to that vaccine. And it was a very accurate system according to the group that designed it. It was a team led by a guy called Lazarus. And CDC paid for the whole thing, millions of dollars, and it was a long-term study. And they looked at one HMO, which was Harvard Pilgrim up in Massachusetts, and they did this machine counting system for Harvard Pilgrim, and then they compared what the machine counting system had gotten, had yielded and collected in terms of vaccine injuries. And they compared that to what VAERS had collected during the same period at Harvard Pilgrim. And they said that VAERS was capturing fewer than 1% of vaccine injuries. And they had a system now that would capture over 95%. And they were very proud, and they brought it to CDC and said, our system works, here's the data. The data showed injuries in about 2.7% of vaccines.
Of all vaccines?
Yeah, all vaccines, about 2.7%.
Wow.
Which I think is something like 1 out of every 37 vaccines you get, there's an injury. And CDC saw that and said, we're not going to use the system. And they shelved it in 2010, and they've continued to use VAERS now for 22 years when they know that it doesn't work. When
Can
they
you
know
bring it
it
back?
is designed to fail.
When he talks about, also, it should be noted, the vaccine injury, that doesn't necessarily mean autism. Sometimes that can get conflated because there is so much focus on autism, but just a number of different side effects. I mean, we've had a couple different authors of the week on this program who have suffered a number of different injuries due to vaccines that have been fully acknowledged by the CDC. So it isn't, nobody, even in government or CDC, denies that there are injuries that occur due to vaccines. They just continue to present the storyline that there's no way we can really track it or prove it. And the point that RFK Jr. is, well, I don't know if he's directly making the point, but the point of the information that he's providing there is that they thus far have deliberately kept a system to collect evidence, to, quote, monitor vaccine injury, yet when it comes to actually evaluating it, the CDC itself says, well, we can't trust our own data because it's unreliable. Now, what does that say to us? He did touch on one study that was done and how it is that the CDC manipulates studies at times in order to get an outcome that they prefer.
What you would do if you wanted to find the answer, which is to compare outcomes in a fully vaccinated group to health outcomes in an unvaccinated group. And CDC did that study in 1999. They brought in a team of scientists under a Belgian researcher named Thomas Verstraeten, and they looked at the data. They looked at children who had received the hepatitis vaccine within the first 30 days of life and compared those children to children who had received the vaccine later or not at all. And they found an 1,135% elevated risk of autism among the vaccinated children. And it shocked them. They kept the study secret, and then they manipulated it through 5 different iterations to try to bury the link. And, we know how they did it. They got rid of all the older children, essentially, and just had younger children who were too young to be diagnosed. And they stratified the data, and they did a lot of other tricks. And all of those studies were the subject of that kind of trickery.
Again, I don't think to most people this is a surprise and a lot of this information, given his position now and the access RFK Jr. has to these studies, he is now able to reveal, and much of it obviously a revelation to him now that he has access to this information. And so it's sort of like the Biden mental decline. Most of us recognized it, acknowledged it, and knew it. But then we begin to finally get some of the details of, okay, how were we misled? What attempts were taken? What was going on behind the scenes? And that's what we're getting from RFK Jr. We're going to take a quick break, get a traffic update. And then one of the other things he talks about briefly is, you may recall, for a period of time, the disinformation campaign that the vaccine was 100% effective. Now, it's amazing. If you talk about this, there are some people on the left that will flat out claim, well, that was never said. I mean, it's like, wake up in a different world and reset every day. So RFK Jr. explains what numbers they used, what study they used in order to falsely claim that the vaccine for COVID was 100% effective. That next. One of the lies that we were told by the experts and accused of being science deniers if we did not believe it is that the COVID vaccine was 100% effective. And what so often happens in situations like this is it's not a lie that is just pulled out of thin air. They will take a study or they will take numbers and misrepresent those, manipulate or molest them so that they can say, oh, no, well, we did a study that says just this, and so science, you must believe it. Look, I have a lab coat on. And that was what was done when it came to the false claim that the COVID vaccine was 100% effective. And this is how they did that, explained by RFK Jr.
Pfizer vaccine, when it came out, more people died in the vaccine group than in the placebo group. I had 20,000 people who got the vaccine, 20,000 who didn't. And after 6 months, they looked at it, and there was 23% more deaths in the vaccinated group from all causes than in the placebo group. And the efficacy was kind of dubious because
Well, yeah.
there was only 2 people who died from COVID in the placebo group. And there was 1 person who died from COVID in the vaccine group, and that's the whole data set they were looking at. And so they said, you remember they were saying the vaccine is 100% effective. Well, that's why they were saying it, because there was 2 is 100% of 1, right? 100% larger than 1. So that's what they had. But what they were telling the American people, oh, it's 100% effective. And that when people heard that, they thought, if you get the vaccine, you can't get COVID, which of course now everybody realizes was wrong because everybody got COVID, whether they got the vaccine or not.
All right, now you listen to that and you go, well, that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't add up. Well, that's the point, because they weren't telling the truth. They were just using math to mislead. And so in that, and this was the Pfizer study, and as he noted, 21,720 people were given the vaccine, 21,728 the placebo. And out of each group, of those who were vaccinated, 1 person died. Of those who were not, 2 died. And so then they say, oh, well, 2 is, there were 2 that didn't die that had the vaccine, 1 that did, and 2 is 100% more than 1. So 100% more people didn't die than did die, and so that's a 100% effective rate. Now, again, you're hearing that and you go, but that's not how that works. Well, exactly. That's not how that works. But you know how they say, show me your math? Remember that? About the time you got to, I don't know, 8th grade, 9th grade, the answer itself wasn't as important as how did you get there, so you had to show your work. Well, that's what we weren't being shown. We weren't being shown the work because the work did not translate to the answer that they were giving us. And, still to this day, and it seems like there's been a real resurgence of this, and I don't know if it is, well, I don't want to say a resurgence. I've just noted in the last couple of weeks, noticed that there have been an increased number of articles, and the news leaders had some about, how skepticism has really had an impact on people getting vaccines. And of course, it's all in the context of people spreading disinformation. It's a regurgitation. It's a revisit of the accusations that the elites who were lying to us had laid out, during the whole COVID fiasco in the first place. And I've just noticed it popping back up all of a sudden. And I'm not sure if it's because they are I don't know, they're recognizing that RFK Jr. is going to start revealing this stuff like he is now, and all right, here's what we know that the CDC was claiming, here's what we know Pfizer was doing, here's what we know about these different organizations, and so they are trying to once again get people to not even listen to this. No, don't listen to this. You don't want to listen to these people. They're science deniers, they're kooks, they're conspiracy theorists. he makes another point, and we're going to get a traffic update about the bonus structure incentive that pediatricians deal with, and how his assessment, and I think this is fair given human nature, intentional or otherwise, that if you are offered money in exchange for getting more children vaccinated, then human nature demonstrates that, you may increase the number of children that get vaccinated who otherwise may not. Now, while some will say that's not true, I would ask, then why are you giving the incentive? What's the point of it if it doesn't incentivize? So his audio on that coming up as he sat down with Tucker Carlson, talking about vaccines and vaccine injury and more. I'm Nick Reed. RFK Jr. Noting in his conversation with Tucker Carlson that insurance companies, they offer bonuses to pediatricians based off of number of vaccines they give. And here he is addressing that particular issue.
There's a published article out there now that says that 50% of revenues to most pediatricians come from vaccines. And then there's a whole structure where Blue Cross and the other insurance companies pay bonuses to the pediatrician to make sure, if, for example, 95% of if their clients are fully vaccinated, they get huge bonuses. It could be tens of thousands of dollars. And that's why you're a pediatrician. If you say, I want to go slow on the vaccines, or I want to have a little different schedule, your pediatrician will throw you out of his practice because you're now jeopardizing that bonus structure. And these are all perverse incentives that stop doctors from actually practicing medicine and caring for the client because they're looking at the bottom line.
I think that it's, again, average people will recognize that clearly not every pediatrician would be impacted and affected by this in a negative way. I think it's also reasonable to recognize that some who don't mean to be, who aren't out there just trying to get that bonus, or that, that they may still, push it just a little bit. Now, there will also be some that it's all about the bonus, and you better get your kid vaccinated. If you don't, you're going to spread disease. It's going to be across the spectrum. And I think it's a reasonable conversation to say, is it ultimately a positive thing to give financial incentive for these purposes? But what I don't like is, again, because I don't think it's an honest discussion, is to dismiss it as if, no, this is only good and positive. And There's a fact check in USA Today. Incentive programs for physicians are built around quality metrics, not just volume. And what they found is that, of course, it wasn't untrue, but that it is missing context. And the context that they argue is that, well, it's just for their own good. And that, yes, they do incentivize them financially to give kids vaccines, but they incentivize them for lots of other things as well. And hey, this is just the insurance companies that are trying to look out for what is in the best interest of the patient. And that is not addressing the issue. That is taking a defensive position. And I also find it, it's one of those instances where all of a sudden the media loves insurance companies because they're so wonderful looking out for your health. Springfield's Talk 1041. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Nick Reed. If you missed any of the show thus far, we will have it up in podcast form. You can also go back to YouTube, where we are streaming live currently. Springfield's Talk 1041. You can watch and listen to it. We played quite a bit of audio of RFK Jr. and information he's revealing. A lot of it is information that is relatively new in terms of studies and things done that have not been revealed until he got in there, and particularly when it comes to some of the stuff CDC has studied, and so it's really been kept secret, some of this stuff, for years and years and years, and he's out there revealing it. And boy, anytime you talk about autism, vaccines and autism, it is so personal to pretty much everyone, because one, you're talking about medical stuff, and two, that just about every single one of us has made a decision about in our lives, either to get a vaccine or not to get a vaccine. And when you throw in the situation of autism, which is very personal to people, I understand why it is that it is such. It's a subject matter that so many people find themselves emotionally engaged in. It makes complete sense to me, 100% sense. Now, I wanted to read a couple of text messages, and it's one after the other from a listener. And the second one kind of apologizing for the tone, which I do not think was necessary at all. But it brings up a position that I think is very important to recognize. And so talking about RFK Jr., and the text message reads that he's speaking incorrectly. They have studied several. You need to ask Dr. Linda Garrison Kane, or have her on your show. She's the leader on autism at Missouri State. My son was diagnosed on the spectrum. She works with him and has taught me a lot. She would tell me that she would be thrilled if they found a link, but they haven't. Fact is, by repeating this, that you're pushing incorrect information. You admitted, RFK Jr. admitted, that you don't know, but you keep saying it. That does not help. And then there was a follow-up noting that, hey, sometimes my texts come across as short, but I don't mean to be that way. And being very complimentary. And so, no, I totally 100% understand, and I know I'm that same way when it comes to text message and stuff. I over exclamation point things. That way I sound like I'm, in my head, upbeat and not being curt. So 100% understand your concern there. Now, I would say that, one, there's a very good chance, much of what RFK Jr. is revealing, that somebody who is a lead expert when it comes to issues like autism, that's information that they too haven't seen because it has been kept hidden or unpublished. We tend to think that doctors in general, people in the medical world, they know all things like they know everything. Like, oh, if we came across and read a study of something, then, well, surely our doctors must know it. But that's just not how it works. I mean, they're very busy dealing with patients, and most, frankly, don't sit around and research the latest in medical discoveries. So I think oftentimes we assume that there is this open portal of information directly into the minds of people in the medical profession that doesn't really exist. They're human beings just like we are. And so there is going to be a lot of information that they don't have. And especially if you have pharmaceutical companies that do studies and then they don't release them, or you have the CDC that does a study but they don't like the outcome and so they dismiss it and say, well, you can't trust our system. So sometimes that does come into play. And I think most doctors probably would acknowledge that, yeah, there's going to be studies out there I've never heard of. Now, I don't know that that's the case in this particular situation. I just try to really recognize the reality and all the different aspects and components and recognize that, that nobody knows everything and that there's almost always information that even the greatest expert won't know. And to me, a sign of, if you want to call the individual an expert, that they are somebody that one can rely on really listening to is if they fully acknowledge that. Fauci took that position. If you don't believe me, then you deny science. That's craziness, total craziness. There are so many unknowns. And the reason that I believe in hearing people out, as long as they have something there, some sort, it may be something I disagree with, it may be an assessment that I think is kooky, but the reason that I believe in putting it out there, because by not doing so, you miss out on a lot. I don't think there's probably been a medical discovery that has come about that did not involve others saying, that's insane, stop it. Things that today seem so commonplace. It wasn't until the 1800s that somebody actually even thought of the idea of germs, and even then he was ignored. It was a doctor from Hungary, and he was in Vienna at a hospital there, and he noticed, it's actually a pretty fascinating story to me. He noticed that there were two different wings in the hospital. There were women that would have babies that doctors would deliver, and then women that would have babies that midwives would deliver. And he thought, well, that's weird. And then, in addition, he noticed that the wing that had mothers delivering babies that were delivered by doctors died post-childbirth, like within a relatively short period of time, at twice the rate of those who died that had midwives. And he would learn that that's the reason there was this second wing, because women increasingly did not want doctors to deliver their babies because they were dying left and right. And so he thought, as an intellectually curious guy, well, that's really weird. What is causing that? And he just racked his brain, couldn't figure it out. And then eventually there was a colleague of his that died after doing an autopsy on someone. And so he thought, well, maybe it had something to do with the autopsy. And then, so he started paying attention and noticed that you had this increased rate of mothers dying after giving birth that were delivered by a doctor who had recently performed an autopsy. And so he thought, well, there's got to be something going on there. So again, concept of germs did not exist. We did not know germs. So he thought maybe there's like invisible things in the cadavers that are attaching themselves to the doctors, and that like death things, because the cadaver's dead, and maybe like little invisible specks of death that then get into the mother. And so he encouraged these doctors, said, okay, it was some sort of sanitary solution like lime and something else, I think, that he came up, that he began having them wash their hands in, because there was no hand washing at this point, and put the instruments in, and guess what happened? Bam. The death rate plummeted. And the number of mothers dying after childbirth delivered by doctors became the same as with the midwives. And so he was like, I got this figured out, and I'm going to present this idea. And he was told, you don't know what you're talking about. How dare you blame doctors? He'd be kicked out of the hospital. He'd go back to Vienna. Similar situation there, implemented these policies, and immediately same sort of reaction. Presented his idea. So you're out of your mind. You're anti-science. What are you talking, invisible death specks? What sort of, are you a lunatic? That's insane. You're telling me all of these medical experts have no idea what they're talking about, but you do, with your magic death, whatever things. And he would eventually be thrown in an insane asylum, and he would die there. And it wasn't until however long, Louis Pasteur and, some others, Lister, I think Lister is the name Listerine, Listerine comes from that these individuals would, validate, and it became then just a no-brainer accepted practice. But, that's just an instance of a demonstration that there's sometimes things, and this is a guy that wasn't listened to. And he could have been wrong. He could have been completely crazy. But how many people unnecessarily died because the position was taken, we shouldn't even listen to you because you don't know what you're talking about? And so that's why I'm a believer in listening to people that I go into it oftentimes thinking, I don't even necessarily agree with this person, but I want to hear what they have to say. And if they are providing what seems like some factual basis for their assessment, to me, that's worth it. And everyone's different. But no, I 100% appreciate and understand the text message, and I thank you so much for sending that in, because I think it is a very important thing to think about and to discuss. All right, so we've got traffic in a moment, weather as well. Right now, latest news update.
And the first alert forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt, sponsored by St. Clair the Ozarks Home Improvements. Today we'll see sunny skies with a high near 86. Tonight, mostly clear with a low around 64. For your Thursday, sunny with a high near 89. And looking ahead to Independence Day, we'll see sunny skies with a high near 90.
And on the flip side of the point I was making earlier, there, if you look back at some of the medical that would become theories, accepted theories, and the approaches in dealing with certain medical ailments, they are quite horrifying. And so, while there are many examples in which you can say, see, this person was not listened to, and we should have had that discussion because they had a great discovery and lives could have been saved much earlier. There are lots of instances in which, like, should not have listened to that person. The guy, it's like, oh, they're schizophrenic, drill a hole in their brain. There's plenty of examples in which it does go the other way as well. Someone texted in asking the song, bumper music that played, they texted in 7:57 right before the segment. Jordan Davis by Dirt.
Oh, yeah.
I would guess that played at 7:55 and
bet
37.
that's it.
So that's it. So if you're listening still, if you could confirm that you heard that text, otherwise we will text you that information on the Pyramid Roofing Company talk and text line. I'm Nick Reed. All right, here's some good news. The University of Pennsylvania yesterday modified a trio of school records set by male swimmer Leah Thompson, saying that it will also apologize. Evidently, this is going to be in the form of a letter. Apologize to female athletes that they say were, quote, disadvantaged by Leah Thomas's participation on the women's swimming team, part of a resolution of a federal civil rights case. This is a big win for the Trump administration and, of course, for women and girls in sports. The U.S. Education Department in Penn announced the voluntary agreement of the high-profile case that focused on Thomas, who last competed for the Ivy League school in 2022 when he became the first openly transgender athlete identifying as a girl to win an NCAA Division I title. The department investigated Penn as part of the Trump administration's broader attempt to remove transgender athletes from girls and women's sport. Now, that's an inaccurate description. It's males. Now, they may be males that are transgender, but if you have a girl, this is a real problem I have. This is a real problem I have every time they talk about, well, it's preventing transgenders from competing in sport. No, it's treating everyone the same. So if you are a girl, but you identify as a boy, you can still compete. You just compete with girls. And so even this verbiage, and this is SRN News. I mean, so it's not as if this is some left-wing news site by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, this is a news network we carry, specifically because in terms of radio providers, they are, in my assessment, the most straightforward, unbiased, unaffected by the left's language news reporting outlet that is available. And even they wrote an attempt to remove transgender athletes from girls and women's sports. Well, it's not an attempt to remove transgender athletes, because you can be a girl who is transgender and identifies as a boy, and you can still compete against girls because that's what you are. But ultimate point, under the agreement, Penn agreed to restore all individual Division I records and titles to female athletes who lost to Thomas and sent a personalized apology letter to each of those swimmers, the Education Department said. By Tuesday afternoon, the Penn website showed other athletes holding the school's top times in Thomas's event. The site was annotated with a note that read, competing under eligibility rules in effect at the time, Leah Thomas set program records in the 100, 200, and 500 freestyle during the 21-22 season. While Penn's policies during that swim season were in accordance with NCAA eligibility rules, at the time we acknowledged that some student athletes were disadvantaged by these rules. We recognize this and will apologize to those who experience a competitive disadvantage or experience anxiety because of the policies in effect at the time. And, this is a big win for women and girls. But, it's this disadvantaged by the rules. This is the whole reason Title IX exists in the context of sports, is the recognition and understanding that you have two completely physically different classes of human beings. You've got men and you have women. You have boys and you have girls. Once you get up above like 10, 12 years old. And it's not as if there was some sort of discovery post allowing this guy to compete against girls in which you're like, now that we look at it, maybe this is a disadvantage. This was an alteration of what had long been not just accepted, but common sense, bipartisan rules that were set up in order to allow girls to compete on an even playing field, and that being with other girls. But that being said, they can make it, word it however they want. It's still, I think, a massive win. Springfield's Talk 1041. I'm Nick Reed. I was this song here when the anti-ICE riots started up a few weeks ago in LA and New York. This is a song I kept thinking of.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really, that's why it's why you don't see it in a small town, because, you know how it would play out. Plus, generally speaking, in small towns, you're talking about non-left leaning governments, and so it just wouldn't be tolerated anyhow. You want a great home loan? I want a great homeloan.com. 120 days that pre-approval letter is good for. And so that means that you get that pre-approval letter and you got months. And let's say that the months go by and you still haven't found that home. You pretty much have the basic information you need for them to resubmit it. So it's not nearly as work intensive as the first time around it may be for you, in terms of, well, we got to get these bank statements and that and so forth and so forth. But oftentimes people's instinct is, well, I don't want to get the pre-approval and then it expires and then I find a home, so I'll just wait until I find a home and then do it. Well, there's a number of problems with that. Number one is you may find out you don't really qualify for as much as you thought you would, or you do, but you're going to be house poor. You aren't going to have money for anything else. Or you can actually afford it. It is the best find ever, but somebody else finds it that same day. They have a pre-approval letter and you haven't done that yet. And guess who wins? They do, you don't. 120 days is a long time. So don't delay on that. Make that step one when you start looking at your new or for your new home at iwantagreathomeloan.com, because you do. Well, apparently I'm doing the weather. Sarah just walked out of the studio to help another station. All right, I can do that. First Alert Forecast, sponsored by St. Clair of the Ozarks Home Improvements. And the forecast from Ozarks First meteorologist Tom Schmidt. Let's see here. Sunny, 86 for a high today. Mostly clear tonight, 64. 89 tomorrow, and Independence Day. Oh, yeah. In my head, because in Republic, Friday was the big have a blast or whatever it's called. And so I'm like, wait, is this an old weather? We already had Independence Day. Independence Day, sunny, a high near 90. Mike Landis has had the story about still the number of people that are without power. And yesterday I read a text from someone that's like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. And it wasn't just weeks ago, or maybe perhaps a bit further back than that. A lot of people experienced power outages, but it wasn't the power outage so much that I think a lot of people find frustration with. It is what appears to be the extended amount of time it takes in order to get power restored. And we haven't really seen... It just doesn't seem as if the duration of time in which people have gone without power has been to the extent that it was back during the ice storm until recently. And I think, here's what I think. I think that the city needs to address this when we're talking about CU specifically. And I think they need to address it, one, because people are talking about it. And it has happened a couple of times this season. And while a vast majority of people are with power and don't go for an extended time without power, there are, when you're talking thousands of people or even hundreds of people that go for days and days and days on end, you start to think, this just is, what is going on? You're asking questions, and it's normal to ask questions. Why is this happening now? And with what appears to be, maybe it's just a couple of times, but like, okay, some frequency when this did not seem to be the case in the past. Now, to that, there may be perfectly logical answers that are fluke situations that don't have anything to do with manpower or infrastructure. It could be fluke situations. But if the reasons for the apparently more recent extended periods of time in which people are going without power are not addressed, if that's not explained to people, that's not a good thing. And I know a lot of times what happens is, and I get this, I understand this, when you're in an industry and you are the one working behind the scenes, you know and you understand, and your number one priority in the moment is we just got to get this on, right? We just have to fix this problem. And once the problem is fixed, people go back to, oh, okay, good, it's finally back on, and then they go back to their day-to-day, and so then it's nothing we need to address because everything's fine until it happens again. And then when it happens again, the number one priority is get it on, get it fixed, got to get it figured out. And once that's done, then people are happy and they stop talking about it, and so it doesn't get addressed. I think that the people are owed an explanation. And when I say that, it's not in an accusatory way, and that is not to suggest that somebody is necessarily doing something wrong. But when you have your citizens, when you have customers that are increasingly going without power, and it's for an extended period of time, and they're like, what the heck is going on? What is causing this? Why is this happening? Why is it taking so long? And I just think that it's appropriate, and frankly, the responsibility of whether it's CU or the city or together, be like, hey, listen, we know that this season there has been a disproportionate number of power outages, and it has been off for a disproportionate amount of time. Or maybe to say, hey, we know it seems that way, but in reality, that's not really the case. We usually have this many outages for this many people on average during storm season, and that's pretty much in line with what we have. Just, to lay out, hey, here is what is going on, and it either is not abnormal or it is abnormal. And whether it is or isn't, what causes these delays? And is there something that needs to be done in order to fix it? Is it a manpower issue? Are there enough people? Are there enough people, but they aren't, they have to be contracted out because of overtime issues? Or is it, no, we have enough people, that's not the issue. We already have enough hands working on it. If we added more hands, it's not going to do any good. Is it an infrastructure issue? Are we dealing with outdated infrastructure? I'm asking these questions, not suggesting that any of these different aspects are in play, but just noting that these are things that people wonder and they want to know. And I just think that it would be wise and best. There's no downside to it whatsoever. I think, in fact, you sort of win people over oftentimes if you're like, hey, guys, we know this really sucks. And we are. And I think people understand and appreciate, particularly when they see the guys and maybe some gals as well at night or in the rain, and they're out there. They're the ones that have to get up in the middle of the night and do it. And there is an appreciation for that. But at the same time, people want to know what's going on. And I think you win some good graces from people and some level of, patience by explaining, here's what we're dealing with. This is why some of you have gone 5 days or 6 days without power. And that's just a recommendation. Hey, Springfield has a new city manager. Maybe that's something that he can, spearhead. Springfield's Talk 104.1. I'm Nick Reed. We were talking about the CU and power outages and so forth. And so you were noting that, the last bit of information you got, and it was like, hey, here's how many people the power's out.
Correct.
And we're working on it. And I hope I don't think it came across this way, but just to make sure people understand, I'm not suggesting that there is not communication from CU and customers in terms of, here's where we are, this is how many people are out of power. I'm talking about the big picture thing, like the overall situation. And I'm not CU, I'm Liberty, and so this doesn't affect me personally or directly. Other than, I guess, we're CU here at the building.
We are.
Okay, so yeah, I guess it does professionally affect me. But there's a difference between, both are good and valuable, but there's a difference between keeping people updated as to, here's what we're working on, this is the estimated time, this is what we're doing in the moment, and afterwards sort of an assessment of, this is the state of the electrical grid. This is the state of affairs that we're dealing with overall, and this is why it is that these prolonged periods of outages are occurring for people. So there's just a very distinct difference there I wanted to point out. I want to play audio. This is from a couple of days ago. Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock, who is a slumlord, and he's also a minister. And he is a U.S. Senator from Georgia. He is the one that got elected after Joe Biden told people in Georgia, if you vote for him, I will give you all $2,000. I mean, pretty straight up corrupt, but hey, that's what happened. And even at that, he only gave him $1,600. But that aside. And he was pointing out that it's the standard Democrat talking points that any even appearance of fiscal responsibility is awful. It's horrible. People are going to die. It's the worst thing ever. And he turned in, this is in the Senate, left-wing Democrat, Separation of church and state. Preaching like he's in church.
I have especially been thinking about those of us who are people of faith, people whose lives are informed by Scripture, people of the book. And maybe those of us who have different politics but read from the same book ought to spend some time together reading the book. Because I do sometimes wonder, and I say this with all humility, none of us owns the truth. But if I'm honest, there are days when I have to ask people of my faith tradition as a Christian, are we reading the same book? The book I know says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was sick, I was in prison and you visited me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it also unto me. The book that I love says, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. Speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. My book says whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. The prophet Amos condemns those who buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They sell the poor out and working class people for cheap.
All right, so that is Democrat Senator Warnock. Now, a few things. Number one, again, I think this is one of the areas in which Democrats demonstrate they have no shame. They run around mocking Christians, accusing them of, Christian nationalism and being bigoted and judgmental and homophobic, things that are not true. They threaten to take away tax-exempt status from churches if they encourage people to vote Republican. They make fun of, mock, and act as if there's something psychologically wrong with a Republican who talks about how, he or she felt that God's hand was involved in that individual getting elected, like there's some sort of whack job. Until they feel like they can, just like everything else, use Christ as a tool. Just like they use the environment as a tool, they use illegal aliens as a tool, they use poor people as a tool, something only to benefit their own power, and the Lord himself is not exempt. And this is an example of it on full display. The people who have almost despise Christians until it comes election time, and then they're standing there up at the pulpit with some accent that they unveil for the first time. Secondly, a point that many of you who are Christians probably were screaming in your head as he was talking about, I must have a different book than everyone else. I wonder my colleagues over here. Well, you must have a different book. Because your book apparently presents itself as instructions to elected officials. Apparently, the book that you're using is one that has a foreword saying, hey, this is for you as a member of a governing body. These are the instructions I'm giving you to force people to live by. Because that's not how my Bible works. The scripture that he was reading about how it is that, that the poor should be treated and the hungry should be treated. See, my Bible, that was instruction from Christ to me and to you as individuals. Whereas Senator Warnock evidently believes that that wasn't meant for us. The teachings of Christ, no, that's not for you. He wasn't talking to you. He was only talking to the privileged few like Senator Warnock. That's who the message was meant for, according to his book. And the third point that might be more incidental, but I thought given one of the big political issues at hand today, it could not be any more perfect, in which he is talking about Amos. And I just want to replay that part for you before I make the point.
My book says, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. The prophet Amos condemns those who buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They sell the poor out and working class people for cheap.
Which political party argues we need illegal immigration because they'll work cheaper? He's going to stand up there and cite Amos, preaching about not taking advantage of the poor, not selling the working class for the cheap, not when his political party's argument for, economically speaking, illegal immigration is because they'll do jobs that real Americans won't, that they'll do it for cheaper. Seems as if that's a bit of a contradiction, doesn't it? It's almost as if he either doesn't understand the teachings of Christ at all, or he doesn't really care. Because it's just yet another tool to use against political opposition. I guess there's one person that knows, or I should say one entity that knows the truth on that. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. Sarah Myers.
Thank you. The Pyramid Roofing Company. Many of you are still cleaning up after the weekend storms that rolled through the listening area. And if you're suffering from roof damage, don't go at it alone and don't go with some random door knocker. Make sure that you call a trusted professional, and that would be Josh and his team over at the Pyramid Roofing Company. They offer free roof inspections. They do commercial, residential, and metal roofing services, and they also work with you through that insurance process. They don't use scare tactics. They won't give you any type of long pitch. They'll be upfront and honest about the work that needs to be done and then come up with the best solution for you and your home. So if it is time to have the Pyramid Roofing Company team out to your home, go ahead and give Josh a call today to schedule that free roof inspection. Now you can find all the contact information for the Pyramid Roofing Company under the Sarah's Endorsements tab at ksgf.com.
A couple days ago, the New York Post had a Caitlin Clark piece, and there's two types of pieces written or stories regarding Caitlin Clark. One is usually just about her performance and how above and beyond it is amongst female professional basketball players, current and past, and then how she's treated like crap, which is... It's a fair assessment, and you see it constantly. And this latest story is about all-star voting. And so with the All-Star voting, you have fans voting, you have players voting, you have press voting. And so Caitlin Clark received a record number of fan votes for this year's All-Star game in Indianapolis. 1,293,536 fan votes. Yet when it came to the player vote, 9th amongst guards. 9th. So evidently the vote here amongst the players was that there are 8 other players that are clearly much better than her and much more, much favored. The media vote ranked Clark 3rd. I think for the media, they know the truth, but they're also left-leaning, but they don't want to be too obvious. So they sort of have to balance, between the two, between reality and their left-leanings. There's long been discussion, evaluation about why. And a lot of it is race-based. That so much of the criticism and the overt physical violence, I'd say, at times, that Caitlin Clark is on the receiving of is from black athletes. There's also been a notation that there's a high level of lesbians in the WNBA and that she's like a straight white girl. She is, other than being a straight white guy, second chair for what is wrong with America in the minds of the left. And I do think that there is a number, I think particularly when it comes to the race factor, there are also a disproportionately high number of black athletes. So you're probably going to have a disproportionately high number of black athletes come into physical contact with her. But it has been noted, it's not just black athletes. There are also white athletes that have also been overly physical with her also. I think that I'm sure, so unpopular to say, I think this is a female thing. I think that there is a tendency amongst females, more so than males, to have jealousy and to backbite at one another, even if they're amongst your social circle. I would use as evidence every single one of the Real Housewives shows that exist. I mean, you watch these shows, and these are women that are supposed to be, they're in the same cultural circle. And I know the point of the shows, of course, is to have, sort of drama and so forth. But there's a reason that they pick women to be the central figures of these shows. And while I think that at times it does get aggravated by the race factor and maybe even the lesbian factor, I think that there's a reason that this particular sort of issue does not occur in men's sports, but it's happening in female sports. And here you have a league in particular that has been dominated by black females and has struggled forever to get any attention, and they finally get it. And I think that the leading fuel for this targeting of Caitlin Clark above anything else, above race, above sexual orientation, is just straight up jealousy that is disproportionately existent in female relationships versus male
I think
relationships.
You're 100% right.
Well, good. And listen, guys are different than girls. It doesn't mean, well, this is why guys are better. They're just different. And to me, I'm just telling you, guys are different than girls, and I think that's what we're seeing with this whole situation. Glenn Beck's coming up next. I will talk with you all tomorrow. I'm Nick Reed.